Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're talking about the Celtics Mavericks Game 1 matchup from last night, and the Celtics were in large part able to get this dominant win done without Jayson Tatum having a massive night for them. They built up a 10-point lead. I believe Tatum had only shot one shot at that point, hadn't scored, and it was already a double-digit lead, which just goes to show a couple things. Number one is the fact that the Celtics, I do believe, are, a better overall team than the Mavericks. Something that we were touching on at the end of last segment was the fact that, you can debate who the top four, rankings in this series are. We know it's Luka and Kyrie for the Mavericks, and we know that it's Tatum and Brown for the Celtics. But outside of, those players, again, group them however you'd like, the next handful of players, at least three, maybe four, probably three. That's at least where I had it in my player rankings earlier this week, are all Celtics. And we saw the impact of the Celtics, really that top six being as impactful as they were. And part of that is baked into this conversation with Jayson Tatum, where I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Tatum was great by any means. But people who are saying that he had a bad game either didn't watch the game and are just looking at the box score, or don't truly understand what is going on in these basketball games. Because Tatum, listen, again, I'm not trying to, get too high on him after a performance where he scores 16 points, he has 6 turnovers, and he's 6 of 16 from the field. But you can see every time he touches the ball on the perimeter, it is multiple guys swarming to him. That's how Kristaps Porzingis got a handful of his looks. And also, you look at the 5 assists that he had. I believe if you look at the advanced statistics, he had 14 potential assists as well. But specifically in that third quarter, Tatum was deferring a lot. And in that third quarter, when the Mavericks were starting to make the run, that is where you would prefer Tatum to sort of step up in a more aggressive way. But at the same time, he was making the right play just about every time. Now, the ball was sort of flying out of his hands on some of these passes, so that was definitely less than ideal, and that's something that he needs to clean up. But ultimately, I thought that his approach was extremely unselfish, and it was winning basketball. And it just feels like a lot of NBA fans are at a point where if you don't score 30 points, let alone 20 points, then you automatically had a bad game. But I just think that if you watch, there is clearly an impact that Tatum has that goes beyond the box score. And ultimately, like I mentioned, in those instances like the third quarter where shots aren't falling, and the Celtics were phenomenal shooting the three basically all night. And that is something that when the shots are falling like that, it's the perfect approach for Tatum, because he understands that he's going to get this extra level of attention. And every superstar, star, whatever you want to call it, in the NBA gets extra attention. There's, no denying that. This isn't some unheard of phenomenon. It's just the fact that Tatum is playing on a team that is able to actually cash out on these opportunities that he creates. The fact that nobody in the top 6, you can call it top 8 even if you want to extend it to Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard coming off the bench as well, none of them are liabilities from 3. So Tatum can spend all day driving, getting that extra attention, and the Celtics are going to have an open shot. The difference is that the Celtics, at least when they're hot and they're feeling themselves, can knock these down. You talk about Jalen Brunson, who had, or you want to talk about Anthony Edwards as well. Both of these players are tremendous at getting inside the defense and finishing around the rim, but we saw the lack of spacing with the Knicks and the Timberwolves, where it seemed like Edwards and Brunson, if they weren't entirely putting the team on their back from a scoring perspective, their teams weren't going to win. Tatum is in a different situation. Listen, I know that plays right into the narrative that Jayson Tatum is on a super team and that he always has been. The Celtics are, I mean, you can make a case that they are super team-ish. Now, again, I think that term is vastly overused, but the Celtics have the best roster in the NBA. You know, they had 2 All-Stars this year, but Kristaps Porzingis, if he plays more games, he could have potentially been an All-Star. Derek White, Drew Holiday, not quite at that level. Drew has been in the past, but that's not necessarily who he is anymore in terms of the respect that he's going to gain nationally when his game is more predicated on sacrificing and focusing more on defense than on offense. But, you know, you can say that he's all-star caliber, and there's just a ton of talent surrounding Jayson Tatum to the point where I had no problems with the way that he played last night. I don't think that he looked quite as uncomfortable as it's being made out to. Now, again, some of the passes just flat out weren't good. And there was, you know, an instance where he was trying to post up Luka, and Luka just sort of, you know, nonchalantly poked it loose from him, which started a fast break the other way for the Mavericks. But, you know, ultimately, I think that this is the path for the Celtics to win, is Jayson Tatum being the hub of the offense, which I think that he was. And again, was it his most efficient game? No, I definitely wouldn't argue that. But at the same time, this is kind of the way that the Celtics want to play. Joe Mazzulla ball has always been about getting good looks from 3. And I wouldn't say fully living and dying by it. That's where you have some explosive athletes like Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, Tatum's finishing at the rim. The numbers actually, you know, make it seem better than it actually looks like, at least to me. He's shooting around 70% at the rim through the postseason so far. It feels like he leaves some opportunities there, at least watching. But again, I don't have all the numbers in front of me. But ultimately, again, I don't know if the eye test totally, you know, if the numbers totally back up the eye test to me in that sense. But we know that Tatum and Brown can drive when they like to, and they were just blowing by defenders all night, specifically Luka, and that's something that we're going to talk about in terms of the adjustments that the Mavericks are going to need to make. But they are getting to the rim, and Kristaps Porzingis, it's interesting. We saw it in the Miami series, even when he was playing. He doesn't get very deep in the post when he's doing these post-ups. He kind of settles for the long mid-ranges a little bit more. And last night, specifically in that first quarter, he was knocking them down, which is obviously great, but feels like you'd maybe want him a little bit closer to the rim. Now, a lot of the times when Porzingis had these guys on his back, it was the shorter defenders. It was Luka, it was Derek Jones Jr., that it isn't Gafford or Lively. There was that one possession where Porzingis was involved in the action around the free throw line where he sort of spun around Lively and got himself a dunk as he was hanging on the rim there. Definitely was a little bit of nerves going on in terms of how's it going to look when he lands. But my whole point to this little tangent is the fact that it feels like the Celtics shouldn't be quite as live and die by the 3. But that being said, in a perfect world, according to Joe Mazzulla, for the most part, it is trying to get these open 3-point looks. And that's what the Celtics were doing all night last night, except for in that third quarter where I thought that there was a little bit of a, time period there where Tatum was kind of settling for those outside shots maybe a little bit more. And he had, I think this was in the first half, but he had that pull-up 3 that he hit over Gafford as well. And I feel like typically I have a little bit of a problem with Tatum, who loves to shoot these 3s over taller defenders, over these centers when he gets matched up against them. He actually, with the step back, got a really good look against Maxi Kleber, who still doesn't look totally comfortable out there in my eyes since returning from the dislocated shoulder injury. But, all this to be said, Tatum, I don't really care what his stat line looks like, and I am a Celtics fan, but ultimately I'm a Celtics fan. I'm not a Jayson Tatum fan, so I'm defending him because I feel like he is the most over-scrutinized player in the NBA. The Celtics have won by, massive margins all throughout the postseason, and the conversation has always been about, does Jayson Tatum need to do more? He is playing how his team needs him to right now, and there's a very clear reason why they have been able to have this success despite him not having these, crazy scoring outputs. And he still averaged 30 points per game in the Eastern Conference Finals. And obviously last night, not a big performance, but you saw him ramping up as the playoffs went on. Celtics are 5-0 so far, though, this postseason, with Tatum shooting under 40% from the field, which, again, if you are a Jayson Tatum fan in particular, not a great stat, but in general, I think it speaks to the Celtics and how loaded they are, and the fact that, yes, Tatum may not be, having the most efficient postseason of his career, but he is doing all of the right things in my eyes, and it is a large part of the reason why the Celtics are going to win the finals this year, at least in my eyes. But like I said, the NBA, we know how much of a back and forth type of league this could be. And as much as the Celtics looked like world beaters last night, the Dallas Mavericks still have the best player in the series in Luka Doncic, and they have plenty of talent. They have an awesome home court advantage. So there are things that the Mavericks can do, along with the Celtics not having the, scorching hot three-point shooting and perimeter shooting in general that they had last night. But the Mavericks are going to need to make adjustments, especially on that offensive end. So I want to dive into what things the Mavericks can do differently from here on out in order to take back this series. But before we do so, we're going to be taking a quick break. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere.